name is Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis. I'm the director of the Kairos Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice, and the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign and National Call for Moral Revival. Do not be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people. Yes, the Bible reads, from now on, you will fish for people. What better way to describe movement building, to describe community organizing and animating, to describe what it is to join God than fishing for people? I love thinking about my call to ministry as being gathered into a full, heavy net of others who would be free. I love thinking about my call to ministry as fishing for people who will stand with God and for justice. I have been fishing for people, casting out our nets wide, since I met the National Union of the Homeless and the National Welfare Rights Union, the likes of Willie Baptist and General Baker and Marion Kramer and Savina Martin, about 30 years ago. And boy, was I caught in the nets of those prophetic leaders and this moral movement from below. I was raised in a family with a deep commitment to doing justice, to loving kindness, to walking humbly with God. From the age of 3, I was going to protests with my family in our hometown of Milwaukee. In preschool, I would bring a Winnie the Pooh bag filled with coloring books to church movement meetings with my mom. In elementary and middle school, I was taking part in anti-racist day camps, citywide protests, and concerts that benefited the likes of justice. When I went off to college, I met leaders from the movement my very first day there. Indeed, the movement is my church. It's my community. I heard God calling at Tent City, where 18-month-old Gordo learned to walk amidst the rubble of the former Quaker lace factory in a homeless encampment of 40 families in one of Philadelphia's hottest summers. I heard God's calling marching through Florida behind a Lady Liberty holding a bucket of tomatoes with farm workers from Mexico, Guatemala, and Haiti. I heard God speaking while I drove throughout the nation on a new Freedom Bus tour and met the Jesus People Against Pollution from Columbia, Mississippi, the Big Creek People in Action in Welch, West Virginia, and so many other poor and low-income people fighting for the very soul of our nation. And while I was raised in the church, a Sunday school teacher at the age of 13, a deacon by 16, I didn't realize that my call to organize a moral fusion movement from below was actually a religious call until leaders of the welfare rights movement and low-wage workers movement basically sent me to seminary to see how and if we could challenge the church to see and declare that poverty is a sin, not that poor people are sinners. My own leadership has developed alongside the many people I have labored and fished among. My sense of where God is in the world and what I am called to do has developed as well. Indeed, I see the work I get to do with the Kairos Center and the Freedom Church of the Poor and the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, as a coming together of many streams from my life. And from these streams, I've learned some truths. I've learned that when there is just too much injustice, too much violence and hate, when many religious people proclaim that the only moral issues of our day are gun rights and property rights and laws that say whom can marry whom, rather than what the Bible really says about justice and organizing society around the needs of the people, caring for the least of these who are most of us, practicing peace, allowing all to live a life of abundance and dignity, we must then go back to the Bible, to the prophets, to moral leaders of our own day, and be reminded of what God requires. God does not ask for luxurious gifts, nor the sacrifice of lives and livelihoods. God instead wants for all people to prosper, for no one to have too much while others have too little. God demands justice, not sacrifice, not charity, the righting of wrongs, the repairing of breaches. But it's been since I began to organize as a part of a movement to end poverty that people have said to me that our goals are too ambitious, that demands for human rights and human dignity are both politically inconceivable and impossibly expensive. They often quote the Bible, arguing that since Jesus said, "The poor will be with you always," it can't be God's will for everyone to share in the abundance of our world. But when I read the Bible, including and especially that statement by Jesus, what I see from Genesis throughout the New Testament is a constant revelation of God's will that no one should be made hungry or sick, homeless or underpaid, indebted or bereft by the violence of social injustice. I read an ongoing indictment of those who would take and keep the wealth of our world for themselves and cause others to suffer. I hear the biblical command from Luke 1 to fill the hungry with good things, not simply as caring for the poor as an end result, but building a movement advocating for policies and structures that lift the load of poverty. The Bible tells us to admonish nations to do no wrong to the immigrant, the homeless, the children, and do not shed innocent blood, says Jeremiah. Ending poverty is possible. After all, that passage weaponized against those challenging the inevitability of poverty and scarcity in Matthew 26, when Jesus says, "The poor will be with you always." He's referencing just such a policy, just such a reminder from the prophetic and sacred Hebrew scriptures. That line from Matthew 26:11 is what evangelical leader Jim Wallace calls the most famous Bible verse on poverty. I hear echoes of this verse when I read Dr. King's statement on true compassion from his time to break the silence sermon at the Riverside Church on April 4th, 1967. Indeed, I think this may well be Dr. King's interpretation of Matthew 26. He says, "A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present policies. On the one hand, we're called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will only be an initial act. One day, we must come to see that the whole Jericho Road must be transformed so that men and women will not constantly be beaten and robbed as they make their journey on life's highway. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. As is true in our day, and that of Reverend Dr. King's, throughout the Gospel of Luke, the Deuteronomic Code, the books of the prophets like Jeremiah and Ezekiel, Micah, Isaiah, the people suffer. We hear about chaos, violence taking place in these prophetic lives. And there's injustice in our world today, but there's also hope. There are people coming forward saying, "Here I am, send me." Justice is possible. Ending poverty and racism is possible. I learned this from the thousands of leaders who wake up in homeless encampments without health care, working low-wage jobs, still committed to building a movement to confront racism and poverty, ecological devastation, militarism, and the false narrative of religious, especially Christian nationalism. I learned this from my fierce, justice-loving family. I learned this from our Moral Fusion movement and all of its leaders. I learned this from the prophets of the Bible. We all have a calling. We all have a role to play. We all have been caught in the nets of a movement and a moment. And the message of this moment is really, here we are. Here we are. Send us.